Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. This is actually my very first YouTube video, and I'm really excited to start this journey with you. On this channel, I'll be diving into some of the strangest and creepiest horror stories people have posted on Reddit. So just sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy these unsettling tales. We're starting with our first story titled I Died for 6 Minutes in 2003. Isn't what we think it is. With apologies to the religious, I feel my story must be shared. In 2003, when I was 15 years old, my heart stopped for 6 minutes. It happened on an ordinary afternoon at the point in my daily routine when I walked home from the bus stop. In the 4 blocks between the corner where I hopped off the bus and my front door, I started to feel nauseous. It came on suddenly, without warning. I'd felt just fine all day, had eaten a lunch of Bosco sticks and marinara sauce, something I'd eaten hundreds of times throughout high school. Before I had an opportunity to consider other causes, I broke out in a cold sweat. Then I felt the curious flutter in my chest. My heart slipped into what I later learned was an episode of ventricular fibrillation. I became breathless and collapsed. What happened next has been told to me after the fact. I apparently sprawled in the road, where a woman driving a hatchback nearly crushed my skull beneath her tires. Instead, she screeched to a halt, tried to rouse me, then dialed emergency services when she failed to do so. EMS arrived to discover my heart had stopped beating. I was dead, technically. They transported my body to the hospital and somewhere along the way managed to shock my ticker back to life. Thus began a harrowing, weeks-long journey through the American healthcare system that led eventually to an ablation, a pacemaker, and mountains of debt my family's still dealing with. But my heart's all right. And thank goodness it is, because what I learned that day has taught me never to thank God for anything. Because for those 6 minutes, as my lifeless body traveled across the city, accompanied by 2 paramedics working tirelessly to revive me, my soul transcended our world to visit the hereafter. During my visit, I learned things about our universe that I wish I hadn't. Perhaps in sharing my story, I might help our species prepare for what comes after we expire. It began with light. Blinding, white, pervasive. It bathed me, calmed me. It was everything they tell you about. Beatific, welcoming, the stuff of spiritual experiences. I had the distinct feeling of ascent, like the light was lifting me skyward. I passed through several sets of gates, which my dizzied consciousness hardly registered. Upon reflection, I don't believe they were physical in any sense, and yet I recall the feeling of admittance, as if they might have prevented me from rising had they remained closed. In any event, I arrived in a place without dimension, a place beyond reality. It only made sense while I occupied it. I don't believe a corporeal being can make sense of the astral plane. Something about its intangible existence defies translation. So what I came away with were more impressions than images. I was not alone. Several life forces enclosed me upon my arrival. At first, because of my Christian upbringing, I believed them to be angels. In my incorporeal form, I made the spiritually equivalent gesture of opening my arms, anticipating their embrace. Instead, I felt myself shackled by their powers, like a collared dog. Humiliation and terror came over me. These were not the ethereal beings I'd been led to believe await us. These were cruel, unsympathetic overlords by whom I was fettered. Why? I thought, my soul wailing like a petulant child. Something like laughter returned, but it was cold, mocking. Thoughts floated into my consciousness like birds winging in and out of sight. They delivered some horrifying truths about existence that I'll do my best to relay to you now. Our universe, like many others running parallel to it, contains only a pittance of the total energy in existence. It is a farm used to produce souls, which only arise in the precise conditions found in our cosmos. When you hear scientists talk about the improbability of the existence of our Goldilocks universe, it's because they don't actually come into being spontaneously. They're designed. And the hands that craft them are not benevolent gods, but rapacious beings with little care for the creatures they create. Our ultimate purpose, I learned in the custody of the spirits that shackled me, was to ripen until we were ready to serve them on their higher plane. The Big Bang gave birth to the universe to give rise to life to eventuate in humanity, a sufficiently conscious organism that may be harvested for use as slaves on a higher plane, where time and space dissolve into an eternity we spend in servitude. 6 minutes in heaven felt like a lifetime, which I spent amusing what I perceived to be a childlike spirit with a penchant for psychologically distressing manipulation. It batted me around like a cat with a caught mouse, reveling in the pain it produced. Physical discomforts we imagine hell inflicting upon us pale in comparison to the torture of soul pain. Loss of a loved one comes closest, that piercing emotional damage resulting from trauma. When it became clear my time had not yet expired on Earth and I was to return, I was told not to reveal their existence to the rest of my kind. My reward, they communicated to me, would be a marginally improved station among the slave population. Alternatively, if I managed to convince others of their existence, new horrors would await me when I returned. I can't imagine anything worse than what I experienced, subsumed beneath an ineffable grief and torment. For weeks, I tried to explain to anyone who would listen what I experienced. Everyone told me I'd suffered a very serious and traumatic experience for a young man, that the event left scars on my psyche as well as my heart. I gave up trying to convince them. I slowly began to convince myself that what they'd told me was true. I'd simply imagined it, a death dream, as it were, the mind reckoning with its own imminent demise, trying to make sense of the experience. Then I met someone who claimed to have met God. This was a few years later, when the author of a nonfiction book recounting their near-death experience visited my hometown. I won't reveal the author's name. I don't want to invite a lawsuit, which I'm sure he'd launch against me if he read that I'd besmirched him. I attended a reading and afterward confronted him about his tale. I looked him in the eye and asked if he really met God, something I'm sure he's dealt with hundreds of times. He smiled and nodded, assuring me that yes, God is real and is filled with love. On a lark, I decided to tell him that I knew the truth, that slavery awaits us all. A flicker in his gaze betrayed his knowledge of the fact. He really had died and visited the afterlife, but lied about it in his book because he knew. He knew the truth of heaven, the horrible place our souls are bound for. Now, the second story that we'll dive into is called My Neighbor Has Been Beckoning My Children from His Window at Night. I live in Texas with my daughter Alicia and my son Jay. Their mom has been out of the picture for the past 2 years, not dead, just a piece of shit. And I've managed pretty well as a single father. The three of us lived in a 2-bedroom in a nice neighborhood. I've got a solid job and the kids are thankfully healthy. Everything was smooth sailing until one night 2 months ago, during which I was awoken by Jay poking me in the face. He was sobbing violently, though I recognized it as the "I'm afraid" kind of crying, as opposed to the "I'm hurt" kind of crying, which made me a little less worried. Jay's always been nightmare prone, so I assumed that's what was causing him distress. When I asked him what was wrong, though, he said, "The man in the next house is making scary faces at me." I'd heard my fair share of Jay's stories about monsters terrorizing him from the dark corners of his bedroom, but this was something new. I assumed he meant our neighbor's house, and the lack of fantastical elements in his description made me uneasy. It felt too specific to be one of his usual nightmares. I got out of bed and walked with Jay in tow to my kids' room. Alicia was awake in the top bunk. From the soft glow of their nightlight, I could see her crossing her arms and scowling down at her little brother. I didn't turn on any lights to give myself a better view of the outdoors and peered out the bedroom window. Their window had curtains on it, but for once they hadn't been drawn all the way ahead, and there was a small opening between them through which Jay must have looked out. One side of the neighbor's house, the one to our left from the street, was visible from Alicia and Jay's room. There were 2 windows on the neighbor's side of the house, but it was too dark inside to see anything. I recalled from what I'd seen in the daylight that the window on the left, the one closest to the front of the house, was the kitchen. I wasn't sure what the window on the right was, as it always had its curtains drawn. I asked Alicia if she'd seen anything, and she shook her head. "He's always having nightmares and crying. I don't want to share a room with him anymore, Dad. I never get any sleep. It's not fair." Of course, hearing that made Jay start crying again, so I let him sleep in my room for the night. He has this TMNT indoor camping tent that he prefers to his actual bed. Honestly, at that point, I half suspected his nightmare to be a ploy to get me to let him camp. Anyway, I guess I'm a total pushover because he slept in that tent in my room for the next 2 nights. On the third night, I was again woken up, but this time by Alicia, who was standing over me and shaking my arm. That kid hadn't woken me up in the middle of the night for years. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "The neighbor was making faces at me." Those words and the fear in my daughter's voice really put me on edge. I closed the curtains when I said goodnight. "Did you open them?" "Only a little, but it's 'cause I heard a weird noise." "What did you hear?" Alicia couldn't recall exactly. According to her, she had gotten out of bed to see what was going on, and when she lifted the curtain, she saw a light on in the neighbor's window. The curtains in the back room had been drawn back, and our neighbor was standing in his house, right up against the window frame. What was he doing? Alicia thought for a moment and then made an expression I never want to see on my child's face, or anyone else's for that matter, ever again. I won't do it justice by describing it, but it looks something like this. First, she smiled with both sets of teeth so that there was a little open sliver between the rows, and then she furrowed her eyebrows. She inclined her head towards me, kind of Kubrick stare-esque, and strained the muscles in her neck. The worst part, though, was what she did with her hands. She held out her left arm, forearm up. Then she clenched her right hand into a fist and moved it back and forth rapidly over her forearm. Poor Thing described it as playing the violin, but it seemed pretty obvious to me that my neighbor was pantomiming cutting. Disturbed, I told Alicia to stop and to not make either the expression or the gesture again. I was angry and confused. My neighbor, a man in his 40s, was a bit of a recluse, but he had seemed normal enough in the 3 or 4 times I'd spoken to him. I couldn't fathom why he would do something like that to my kids. After asking Alicia a few more questions, I realized that my neighbor might not have done anything technically, or at least legally, wrong. It wasn't against the law to make inappropriate gestures in your own home, but it seemed like he was targeting my kids specifically. Legal or not, I planned to have a little chat with him the following morning. My last question to Alicia was if our neighbor had made any other gestures, and she nodded. Then she started making beckoning, come here motions with both of her hands. I had Alicia sleep in my room for the night as well. I also checked out the window in my kids' room, but like before, I saw nothing. The house was completely dark. The next morning, before work and after dropping Alicia and Jay off to school, I spent a good 5 minutes knocking on my neighbor's front door. I figured he was home since his car was in the driveway, but he never answered the door. Eventually, I had to leave for work, and as I was walking away, I turned around quickly to see if he was watching me. He was the coward. I saw him for a split second at the front window before he ducked beneath the sill and out of view. Clearly, the guy had problems. I yelled out to him to stop fucking with us, and then left. That same night, I put a plan in motion. While my kids slept in my room, I hung out in theirs. It was a Friday night, and I was ready to pull an all-nighter so that I could catch my neighbor in the act. Although I trusted my kids, I wanted to confirm that there was actually something nefarious going on before I escalated things. I made sure the house was locked up and all the curtains drawn, tucked my kids in, and sat on the floor under the window in their room. At around 9, I started marathoning midnight mass on my phone. I didn't want to wear headphones and miss any strange sounds, so I kept the volume low and mostly read subtitles. At midnight, I started to hear strange sounds. Like Alicia said, it's a bit hard to describe. Best I can do is that it was this low, repeated clicking sound. You know the ch-ch sound you make to beckon a horse? It was something like that. All I knew is that the sound was undoubtedly coming from a person. After a few minutes of this, the sound switched to what I think was supposed to be a whistle, but it came out all wrong, like someone sucking breath in through their teeth. The sound was so crisp that the neighbor's window must have been open, which was an unsettling thought, given that there was only around 15 feet of space between our houses. Certain that the neighbor was at his window and that this was my best chance to see him, I stood up and pulled the curtain back in one motion. I saw him right away. There was a dim light on in his room, allowing me to see that horrible expression Alicia had made the night prior. It was one thing to see my child's recreation, but it was far more frightening on an adult. His window was indeed open, and his arms were stuck out into the cold night, violently swiping against each other in a grotesque mimicry of self-harm. When he saw me and realized that he was looking at another grown man and not some poor child, he stopped his erratic motions. His cartoonish grin faded, and another, more genuine emotion settled over his features: rage. The man grabbed the window and slammed it shut, then closed the curtains with the same forcefulness. I let my own curtain fall. I was a little shell-shocked, I think. Of course, I was perturbed by the sight of the man, by his face and his movement, and the fact that he'd been doing that for who knows how many nights now in an attempt to frighten my kids. However, another detail stuck out as even more concerning to me, which was the fact that I genuinely wasn't sure if the man I had just seen was my neighbor. I'd seen him so few times in the years I'd lived in that house, and I was having trouble conjuring up his face. I sat on the floor for a minute, my blood thundering in my ears. I definitely had enough evidence at that point to call the cops, right? Just as I was about to pull out my phone, I heard a tremendous smack against the glass of the bedroom window. After a brief hesitation, I pulled the curtain back again. There were no lights on in the neighbor's house, and there was also no one outside from what I could see. I pulled the curtains back a little further and saw a handprint in the top corner of the window pane. It's worth noting that our house is on a raised foundation, and that particular window is very tall, so even though the window is on the first floor, the man outside would have needed an insane vertical to get his hand up there. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I explained the situation to them, I quickly walked around the house to see if I could catch a glimpse of the man. My last stop was my bedroom. Once inside, I locked the doors, and while still on the phone with the operator, I took my handgun out of the safe in my closet. My heart was beating out of my damn chest, but I knew I had to stay calm, even more so when I saw that Alicia was awake and looking out of the tent at me. I reassured her in as few words as I could, whispering that we were okay, but we had to stay very quiet. I sat on the edge of my bed, my firearm ready and my ears straining. My kid's tent was in the corner, and to the left of the tent, in the middle of the wall and directly across from where I sat, was a window. After what felt like an eternity, I saw something. It was a cloudless night, and the moonlight was bright enough that I could see a silhouette through the white curtains. The dark shape was nebulous at first, but became more clear as the man outside stepped closer to the window. Somehow he knew which room we were in. The silhouette didn't move for several minutes, and I remember being thankful that from the angle at which she sat, Alicia couldn't see it. Then something happened that I couldn't entirely wrap my head around. The man stepped back from the glass and raised his arms, making a Y shape with his body and his limbs. Only his arms were far too long. They seemed to be double the length that they should have been, each arm about the same length as his entire body. I thought at first that he was holding something, maybe two pipes that just appeared to be an extension of his limbs, but I could clearly see two hands at the ends of the extremities. I could see 5 fingers on each hand, flopping around slightly as the man brought his arms closer to the window. Thud, thud, thud. I stood up and readied myself to shoot, but just then the sounds of sirens pierced the quiet night. The man outside banged his hands against the window one last time, and then it was as if someone had sliced his arms at the elbows. His forearms seemed to shear right off, and the man took off running before they so much as hit the ground. When the police officers announced themselves, I answered the door and explained the situation to them. 2 officers, a man and a woman, asked me a few questions about my neighbor, which I assume was necessary to establish probable cause for a search. Once finished, they told me to stay inside with the doors locked while they investigated the neighbor's house. I watched them through the window of Alicia and Jay's room. They knocked on the neighbor's door, and when no one answered, they tried the front door handle. I watched the unlocked door swing open. The 2 looked at one another and then entered. I'm not sure what they found inside that house. All I know is that when they emerged a few moments later, they both looked very disturbed. When I went outside to ask what they had found, the female officer told me simply, "Your neighbor's dead." The rest of the night was a blur of strangers in uniforms filing in and out of my neighbor's home. Some came to my porch afterwards to ask me questions, and none offered me any answers. They moved with tight-lipped efficiency, their faces guarded, their words clipped. Uh, at one point, I wandered to the side of the house and found several people photographing something on the ground outside my bedroom window. Before they could ask me to leave, I made out the gruesome shape of two human arms. The kids and I have been staying in my parents' apartment for months, and I think everyone, even Jay, is getting tired of the cramped living situation. We can't stay in the house. Alicia is way too traumatized for that, and I wouldn't be comfortable staying there while the murderer is still at large anyway. I want to sell the damn house, but our story going semi viral is making that difficult. After all, who would want a house that, thanks to the news, has become permanently associated with phrases like dismemberment and days of torture and victim barely recognizable as human? Now, the last story I want to share with you in this video is called My Sister's Ex-Boyfriend Keeps Showing Up at Family Events. She's been dead for 2 years. When my sister Lisa died 2 years ago, our family changed forever. We weren't perfect before, who is? But Lisa's death fractured us. My dad barely speaks anymore. My mom busies herself with every charity event she can find. And I've been stuck, angry, looking for someone to blame. Lisa was the glue that held us together. She was warm, outgoing, always laughing, the kind of person people gravitate to. She loved hiking, photography, and the outdoors. Her death, officially ruled an accident, was almost poetic. She slipped while hiking and fell into a ravine. At least that's what the police report said. But if that's true, why does it feel like her ghost never left? Lisa's ex-boyfriend, Matt, was never part of our family. He and Lisa dated for about a year before she broke it off. She said he was controlling, obsessive, constantly texting, showing up unannounced, making passive-aggressive comments when she spent time with her friends. I remember her joking about it once, calling him my stage 5 clinger. But it wasn't funny. Not really. After the breakup, Matt didn't take it well. He kept texting her, leaving voicemails, even sending her flowers at work. She brushed it off, said he'd get bored eventually. I thought she was right, until the funeral. Matt didn't come to the service, thank God. But a week later, he showed up on our doorstep. It was a rainy Thursday. My mom opened the door, and there he was, holding a bouquet of lilies, Lisa's favorite. "I just wanted to pay my respects," he said. His voice was soft, his head tilted like he was trying to look vulnerable. My mom, who has never been good at saying no, let him in. Matt sat on our couch, talking about Lisa as if he knew her better than we did. He described her laugh, her smile, the way she always ordered pancakes with extra syrup. My dad stayed silent, his jaw tight. When Matt finally left, I asked my mom why she let him in. "He's grieving too," she said. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Matt wasn't grieving. He was lurking. Over the next few months, Matt kept appearing. He showed up at family barbecues, holiday dinners, even my dad's birthday party, always uninvited, always with some excuse. "Your mom said it was okay," he'd claim, or "I thought Lisa would have wanted me here." My parents, blinded by their own grief, let it slide. "He's harmless," my mom said. "He just misses her." But it wasn't harmless. Not when he started asking questions. Last Christmas, Matt cornered me in the kitchen. "She was different with me, he said, leaning against the counter. I stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" He smiled, that thin, unsettling smile I'd seen so many times. "She told me things she wouldn't tell anyone else." "Like what?" His smile widened. "Like how she wasn't scared to die." That night, I went through Lisa's journals. She was the type to write everything down, her thoughts, her plans, even little grocery lists. Most of it was normal Lisa stuff, song lyrics, doodles, random observations. But then I found the entry. "I think Matt's been following me. He won't stop texting, keeps saying he knows something I don't. I'm starting to feel like I can't shake him." I showed it to my mom, expecting her to finally see reason, but she waved it off. "Lisa was dramatic sometimes," she said. "I'm sure it's nothing." A few days later, I saw Matt's car parked down the street. It wasn't the first time. I'd noticed it before, idling near the corner, but I convinced myself it was a coincidence. This time, though, I knew. He wasn't watching our family. He was watching me. Last week was my dad's birthday. Matt showed up, holding a gift he claimed Lisa would have bought, a coffee table book about hiking trails. I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted him outside, away from my parents. "What the hell are you doing here?" I snapped. His smile didn't falter. "Paying my respects," he said. "Lisa broke up with you. She wanted nothing to do with you. Why can't you let her go?" His eyes darkened. "She told you that?" "Yes." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She told me a lot of things too, things she didn't tell anyone else." Then he said something I'll never forget. "I was there, on the trail." I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "What?" He smiled again, a cold, empty thing. "She didn't fall. She looked me in the eyes and asked me to let her go." My stomach churned. "You're lying." He tilted his head, studying me. "Am I? Ask yourself this. If she slipped, why didn't she scream?" I called the police that night. I told them everything, the stalking, the journal, his confession. When they went to his apartment the next morning, it was empty. No furniture, no clothes, no sign he'd ever lived there. It's been a week now. I haven't told my parents what he said. I don't know if they'd believe me. Every night, I double-check the locks. Every night, I sit in my bed, clutching my phone, too scared to sleep. Last night, I finally decided to look through Lisa's journals again. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I missed something. Maybe I was looking for answers. But this time there was something new.